There are a few things that I wish I knew before getting into the Monster Hunter franchise, and since Monster Hunter Wilds will be the first game for many of you, I wanted to talk about a few tips on what to expect as well as some things to keep in mind to make the game more fun because there's a lot to learn and it'll be easy to get overwhelmed if you aren't prepared. The first thing that I want to talk about is how the grind is the journey. Something you have to understand with this series is how the gameplay loop is designed. You fight a monster to earn parts. You go back and fight it again and again until you get the parts that you need. You make the armor and weapons you want, and you go and fight the next monster with the new level of power that you have. The thing is, in Monster Hunter, power isn't linear. One armor set might give you better resistance to fire damage, another might give you slightly better dodge rolls. This is a game where you'll be going back to the drawing board constantly, tailoring your build to the specific hunt that you're trying to beat. The further you go, the more hunts you unlock, and the more options you gain to tweak your playstyle to match the next obstacle. Monster Hunter is a game that relies on the fun of doing these things over and over. No hunt will offer the same experience, and the way you interact with both the monster and the environment will change each time. Now imagine what happens when you combine this with the fact that you might want entirely different builds when you try different weapons, so you do it all over again. I don't want you to overthink this, but it will be a big time sink. There's always something greater to achieve or unlock, and it's a big part of the reason that Monster Hunter players love to brag about how they spent hundreds of hours on these games. Once you get hooked, you won't be putting it down for a while. Next, I want you to understand that finding the right weapon takes time. You might struggle with the way the weapons feel, and that's okay. The way I see it, every weapon is like playing an entirely different game. While I will release a bigger video on how to pick a weapon as well as my recommendations for newcomers, I want to say here that you need to be patient with yourself. All of these weapons have a lot of depth and room for player expression. This means that there is no one right way to play it. People will often end up using moves that feel fun and make sense to them, and the same goes for armor builds as well. This means that trying a weapon in the starting armor and training mode will never paint a complete picture. Maybe you'd like the dual blades with a more forgiving setup that allows for a comfortable amount of movement and stamina management, but when you're starting the game you won't have access to all of that, and it can make it feel a lot worse. Not all weapons are made equally when considering the investment required to unlock their full potential. This means that you might like some weapons later when you have options for builds to use skills that synergize well with it, even if you don't like them now. The same could be said for general weapon knowledge. There are many ways to learn from just going and hitting buttons to watching YouTube guides. Whatever you choose, a big part of your enjoyment may depend on hitting that threshold where it feels like you know what to do. That point where you enter into a flow state and aren't just stumbling with the controls. It's when the weapon starts to click. That knowledge won't be there immediately, and it might take hours and hours for you to figure out the things that could be fun for you. This can feel like a daunting time investment, which is why I don't recommend spending tons of hours trying to learn everything about every weapon before you start to make your way through the story. Give them all a go and read the tutorials within the game to get an idea of what they're about. Then, consider trying different weapons on hunts, especially when you go back to fight old monsters while you're farming parts. Learning within a hunt creates for a more engaging experience and won't be as stale as hitting a training dummy. This kind of leads into my next tip, which is that you should not overwhelm yourself with all of the systems and menus. The start menu in Monster Hunter Wilds might feel scary at first, or 400 hours later, but it doesn't have to be that way. When you see the amount of things in this menu, it might feel less like other action games that you've played, and more like an MMO with the amount of options and customization available to you. My advice is to take it in stride. You don't have to understand everything at once. Some things will feel convoluted, and this is another video I will make to explain things so you aren't asking questions like, how do I get my friends to show up in my world? Considering that takes multiple menu options and invites just to happen. But for now, I want you to understand that there are going to be so many things that you just don't need right away, and while you shouldn't ignore them for hours and hours, consider diving into just a few options between hunts or sessions, since the game has enough to learn as it is. This is also true for many things outside of the main menu. Monster Hunter games have lots of side features to engage with, from various NPCs that do things like crafting armor and weapons, but will likely be some sort of garden feature to facilitate a steady supply of herbs and bugs used in item crafting. I expect there to be random quests and collectibles that you stumble upon in the open world as well. Some might lead to quest chains spanning multiple regions that could be gated by the time of day or a specific type of weather. Figuring out all of these things will take time. A lot of this stuff will lead to useful unlocks like more of these side features I've mentioned, or unlocking special equipment like more mantles or even features for the sacreds. These games are packed with lots of love and details in the environment, with surprising ways of engaging with them, so my advice is to make sure to take the time to explore without fixating too hard on it, unless you enjoy that. Then by all means, wander around finding everything there is to find in Wilds, Which again leads into my next tip. Don't be afraid to go in blind. This is in some ways commentary on the current state of being a gamer on the internet, and I know it's ironic considering this video you're watching right now, but I want to strongly urge you to explore the game on your own. You have to remember that discovery is something that you only get to experience once. Before someone tells you how to play your favorite weapon or tells you how to fight a monster, try it out for yourself without looking anything up. You might find it to be more rewarding when you overcome that challenge on your own. Part of being a hunter is being prepared for anything and learning how to think on the fly. We all cart, which is what getting knocked out is called in this series if you didn't know. No matter how good we are, because we're always trying and pushing ourselves to be better each time. There's a lot of beauty in the shared information available in the community, but you don't want to be dependent on it at the expense of your own expression as a player. You can have a lot of fun if you explore what works for you instead of relying on the cookie-cutter builds available online. And then, once you've given it a fair shot, by all means embrace what others are trying and share your own experiences too. It's a fun part of the social experience of Monster Hunter, and I don't want to encourage you to ignore it completely. Just give yourself a chance to figure things out too. And speaking of that social experience, my next tip is to try hunting with others. Monster Hunter is one of my favorite co-op experiences of all time because of how it encourages everyone to help each other. The game gives you extra rewards for helping other hunters. A lot of people need to farm monsters that show up in all parts of the story, so you can always expect to find help when you toss up an SOS, and you should, especially if you're having trouble. Some of the greatest memories players in this series have are from seeing how incredible other players can be and working to clear a hunt when everyone is down for the count or the timer is about to run out. This is not to say that you shouldn't enjoy the thrill of solo hunting too, because it is a different and unique experience. I just really recommend not ignoring the multiplayer component since it's baked into the core of the game, and you'll be surprised at the memories and friends that you make along the way. I want to mention here that I made a Discord called Wildhaven, and I really want to make a community that feels like the best place for new and veteran hunters alike to hang out and talk about the game, so I hope to see you there. The link will be in the description below. And now for my last tip, which focuses on the hunt itself. Learn to speak the language of the hunt. What I mean by this is not the Wyverian language that you'll probably encounter at some point in the game. I mean that each hunt is basically a conversation with the monster. When I first played Monster Hunter back when the World Beta came out, I felt really confused. I saw damage numbers, but I didn't really know if I was doing anything to the monster. It felt like I was blindly hitting buttons without making a dent and getting frustrated whenever my weapon started to bounce off. The thing is, I just didn't know what to look for. Anybody who spends a lot of time around animals will understand this, but even if we don't have a shared language, animals have a way of telling us how they feel in so many unique ways between sounds, expressions, and body language, and the monsters in Monster Hunter are no different. You have to look for things like the speed at which a monster is attacking you. Is it more aggressive as the fight goes on? Or perhaps it starts to slow down as it gets tired. Maybe it starts doing different attacks that you hadn't seen before. Sometimes it starts to drool or limp, which could signal weakness. Maybe you hit its leg enough that it starts to fall over, or you've done enough damage to break its wings and now it isn't flying as much. Monster Hunter puts a lot of focus on this kind of thing. It's not that there isn't feedback, it's just not in the form of a health bar. This might frustrate you at first coming from other games, but give it time and you'll come to appreciate it the way many of us experienced hunters do now. There's a level of immersion in the combat that I think is a reason many of us stick around and come back to these games as much as we do. I don't think that it's easy to understand for yourself without experiencing it and putting in the time because it won't be obvious right away for many people. And that's okay. I just hope that my video has given you some of the knowledge and motivation to find that for yourself so that you can come to love this franchise the way I do. The promise that I can make is that it's worth it. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and I'll see you in the next one.